Welcome to the SAMS Sigma webinar from HighWire Press. As I mentioned, my name is Tasha Mellins-Cohen. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tasha Mellins-Cohen, and with me in the room in Brighton is Craig Laws. Welcome to the SAMS Sigma introduction from HighWire Press. I apologize for the slight delay in starting. We were waiting for everybody to log in. So let's start with a little bit of history. As I'm sure many of you know, the publishing industry started moving online in the early 1990s, taking advantage of the introduction of web technology to go digital, specifically with journals to begin with. And we offered, as an industry, organization access control through IP recognition. So we were very much limiting our online readers to on-campus access. And this was fine in the 90s and even well into this millennium, because our readers were accessing content through fixed computers, primarily in libraries or in their campus offices. However, as we know, and I'm sure many of us are experiencing daily, the rise in remote technologies, mobile devices, tablets, laptop use, and the massive increase in flexible working, meaning that many researchers are accessing content either on trains or at home or wherever they might happen to be, is putting an awful lot of pressure on traditional access control. So with that in mind, Semantico, as was, HighWire, as is, started in 2015 to look at the access control space. And we decided to look at the shape of the industry in three ways. There is traditional access management, by which I mean the kind of offering that you might have seen through SAMS 6, an older version of this technology, whereby institutional access management was handled extremely effectively and traditional subscription models were handled extremely effectively to allow institutional access controls. We looked at a second component, which was the rise of identity management solutions such as Gigya or Salesforce. And then we looked at entitlement management, by which we mean the more complex sales models that are becoming prevalent within the industry. And we started working on a solution that we called SAMS Sigma, whereby the inclusion of all three components within one solution creates a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. And I do apologize for the bad pun there. Before we go too much further, you're going to hear a lot of terminology in this particular webinar, and I want to try and clear it up before we get into the details of it. So the three key terms that you will hear and have already heard are identity, access, and entitlement. By identity, I do not mean your email address or your Facebook account or your LinkedIn account or whatever you might want. Those are identifiers which fit within your single identity. So, as an example, to specify what that user is allowed to read. That process is called authorization, and it means that you are granting people entitlements. You are giving them rights to read or use your content in specific ways. So this is all quite vague. I will come on to a lot more explicit information in a moment. To clarify before we go too much further, when we talk about authentication identifiers or credentials, which you will have seen on the access component of this slide, there are many credential types in the world of scholarly publishing. Some of the more traditional ones are IP access. Now, there is a lot of sound and fury about moving away from IP. I'm here to tell you that about 90% of access across most publishers is still IP-based. It's not going anywhere. We need to make sure that we handle it effectively and accurately, and that's something that Sigma is very well equipped to do. There are trusted referrer URLs. Those of you who are from membership organizations are probably familiar with the idea of putting a URL to your journal behind a member paywall and allowing your members access to your content without requiring that they log into the journal specifically. That's a trusted referrer URL. There's user pass. Now, this might be an individual's username and password or an organization's username and password. They're both valid. I have to say, personally, I'm not convinced that an organization level user pass is a particularly secure way of handling access control, but it's still there, it's still available. There's regions, which in this context is shorthand for geographic authentication. So, for example, allowing countrywide authentication on the basis of a country license. SAML and Shibboleth, I would hope everybody is familiar with Shibboleth. You might be more familiar with the alternative Open Athens. They both, Shibboleth and Open Athens, both are based on the SAML protocol. And of course there are bots. So this is crawlers, robots, and a whole variety of other automated processes for gaining access to content. Two very new pieces of technology that tend to be associated more with identity management systems like Gigya than with traditional publishing access management solutions are OAuth and OpenID Connect, or OIDC. These are single sign-on solutions. If you have a Google account, you have OpenID Connect. If you have a Facebook account, you have OAuth. OIDC is the newer of the two technologies, but both of these are very much built on security standards, and they are a more secure way of offering individual user paths than the traditional mechanism that you will have been familiar with. SAMS Sigma supports all of these, among a whole series of others. Very happy to talk to anybody in more detail about any of those, should you wish me to. So getting back to a little bit about authentication. So one of the things that we have been told over the last 18 months when speaking to people about SAMS Sigma is that authentication and authorization are quite confusing. So we've put this demo together to explain how these things happen. In this particular example, Jeff is on campus and he arrives at the journal.com website, and he has IP credentials. Because he is on campus, the IP range associated with his device, and whether that's a static computer in a library or his personal device, it's still running off of that IP range, provided that his personal device is on the Wi-Fi. Journal.com takes that IP address, that's his credential, and sends that information to the Identity and Access Management System. IAMS is shorthand that does not, in this particular instance, refer to a type of pet food. The Identity Access Management System then, oh, I've gone the wrong way, confirms Jeff's institutional identity. Now, this is important because Jeff has arrived at journal.com with IP as his credential, as his authentication identifier, he gets access to that institution's holdings. He doesn't get access to his own stuff. He gets access to the institution's subscriptions. That's it. That's authentication. Authorization is the next step. So Jeff's now been authenticated based on his IP. Journal.com requests that IP's entitlements from the Identity Access Management System, and the IAMS confirms the entitlements. Something that's really important to note with this is that it happens completely invisibly to Jeff. He is not aware that any of this is going on in the background, and it's very, very quick. It's great. It's a really good solution for on-campus access. Off-campus access, not quite so straightforward. So in this example, Anna has arrived at journal.com without credentials. She is outside of the IP range of her institution. She's not come from a trusted referrer. She is coming in, and the journal just says you can't get access to anything. So Anna turns to her library and proxies into the library through the VPN. And she'll then have to search through the library catalog, and she'll find journal.com, and then she'll go back to journal.com with the library credentials. So this is effectively what Easy Proxy allows. The challenge with this, of course, is that if Anna has arrived at a specific article on journal.com, say from Google Scholar, and she then has to go through this multi-step process to get back to that article with authorization to read it, she's likely to get quite frustrated. And this kind of barrier to access is not the only reason for piracy, but it is one of the reasons that people are turning to alternative methods for gaining access to content. One of the biggest things that we wanted to do with SAMS Sigma was to help reduce those barriers to off-campus access. And we have three mechanisms within SAMS Sigma for doing this. The first one is cross-domain, cross-device, single sign-on. So if an individual has personal access to anything, they get it using their personal ID, their personal username, their personal password, on any device, in any location. That's great. That's a nice, straightforward thing. If you're going to a limited subset of content, or, well, any content that you're willing to purchase individually. The two more adventurous mechanisms within SAMS Sigma for off-campus access are roaming passport and remote access. Now, roaming passport is actually a piece of functionality that we have ported across from older generations of SAMS, which those of you who've ever spoken with Semantico will be aware with our original access management solution, first built back in 2002. So roaming passport allows publisher sites to create a link between an individual user and their institutional entitlements. So in practice, what this means is that if Anna has ever used her device within the bounds of her institutional IP, or maybe not ever, but say within the last 30 days, roaming passport will mean that when she is outside of that IP range, she can still access her institutional holdings for a defined period of time. The really nice thing about this is that it is the publisher website that defines how long that period of time is. It's not a Sigma piece of functionality. Remote access is a more permanent agreement. And in this particular case, what happens is that a librarian with, for example, a particularly high-profile member of staff might want to ensure that that staff member can get access to all of her institutional holdings at any time without having to go through roaming passport, without having to use any kind of VPN. Sigma allows the librarian to issue what is known as a remote access agreement to any member of her institutional staff. And that member of staff can then log in using their own username and password to any site that is supported by Sigma, and they will get access to the institutional holdings that way. So this is a kind of extension of the roaming passport functionality. So going back to our little step-throughs, Anna has arrived at journal.com, and she's got two options. Either journal.com recognizes Anna's roaming passport because she's used her device within the bounds of the IP at some point in the last 30 days, or Anna can add her own username and password in, and because she's got a remote access agreement, she flows into the authentication and authorization workflow, and either way gets access to her full institutional holdings without having to go through a VPN. Excuse me just 1 second. So that's all lovely for the end users, but what does it mean for publishers? So one point is that we are aiming to help you protect and increase your revenue. By reducing bounce rates, by reducing the number of users who hit your website and turn away from using your content because for whatever reason they are not currently authenticated even though they should be, we can show increased usage through your subscriber base. If you had a university, for example, that was seeing 50% off-campus usage and only 10% of that was actually being recognized in your own counter reports, and you can suddenly increase that to the whole, if you can suddenly increase your retention rate and reduce your bounce rate to 0, you're showing increased value to the subscribers. And of course, encouraging repeat users. So the more times that somebody hits your website and can't get access, the less likely it is that they're going to come back. If they have a positive experience and they find it easy to get into your site, they're less likely to write you off as a less than helpful provider of information. SAMS Sigma also has some very powerful and flexible sales models on board. It's been built in such a way as to allow publishers to experiment with new ways of selling content. So, for example, you can bundle up content regardless of ISSN or ISBN. You can license down to specific DOIs and create very granular content collections that you can license either by time or by meterage. So you can, for example, allow somebody to purchase 1,000 downloads, and once their 1,000 downloads are done, they're done. And of course, you can combine Sigma with analytics tools to derive a lot more information that either your sales team or your marketing team or your editorial team can make use of. So whether that's, going back to Turnaway's example, encouraging a non-subscribing institution to take out a subscription because they're seeing a lot of turnaways, whether it's delivering targeted marketing to individuals on the basis of their usage of Sigma, or combining Sigma with analytics tools and really drilling into which institutions have researchers who are looking at specific pieces of content and using that to feed into editorial roadmaps around new sections of your journals or potentially even new journals. And of course, as well as trying to protect your revenue, we're trying to reduce your cost. We've built Sigma to provide as much self-serve opportunity as we can. So yes, there is absolutely a publisher administrator interface that gives you and your teams access to a single hub for viewing and managing all of your customers and all of their licenses across all of your sites. So you don't have to have a separate interface for each journal site, for example. But we've also created a very simple, easy-to-use interface for librarians and researchers, which allows them to self-serve as much as possible. We're not saying that you don't have sight of what they're doing, but you don't have to do it for them. It reduces the call on your internal customer services team quite significantly. And being SaaS-based with regular updates, regular feature releases, and very quick turnaround for requests means that you're not held to slower development cycles or bespoke development when you're looking to do something new with Sigma. So that can help to reduce your costs as well. Importantly, everything that we have done with SAMS Sigma is based on best practices and industry standards. So I mentioned OpenID Connect and OAuth earlier, but we're also looking beyond the public-facing best practice and standards, and we've implemented some extreme programming mechanisms, which means we have incredibly high test coverage. We have very simple API hooks into many different systems and technologies, and we have done everything that we can do to make sure that this is an open, vendor-neutral platform, giving publisher CTOs and other technology boards the freedom to do whatever they want to do and hook Sigma into whatever they want to hook Sigma into. It's not a monolith. As an example, these are integrations that are either in place or worked on or being worked on as I speak. So obviously we have content delivery sites. So those are Scalaris sites. We're looking at JCore sites following the acquisition of Semantico by HighWire. We're hooking into apps to allow individual and institutional authentication on an app basis. Publishers, customer relationship management solutions, membership records, marketing solutions, all of those are being hooked in, as are publisher invoicing systems for subscription renewals. And last but certainly not least, we are hooking into an e-commerce system. So that's, as well as the HighWire one, we're hooking into e-commerce systems for independent publishers. This is just the beginning. There is a lot more to come, we're sure. Excuse me. So that draws us to the end of the presentation. I do hope that you found this useful. Please do reach out to either myself or to Craig. Our email addresses are at the bottom of the screen now. And let us know if you have any questions. Thank you very much.